In 2020, the world shut down. Flights stopped, cities went quiet, and the NBA, it packed its players into a giant Mickey Mouse branded lockdown experiment called the Bubble. On the surface, it looked like a basketball utopia. No travel, no fans, just hoop.
Oh my goodness.
Look at this shot by Lillard.
Oh my goodness.
But behind the squeaky shoes and the highlight reels, there was something much darker. This wasn't just basketball, it was survival. And today we're diving into the scary truth about the NBA bubble, the part the league doesn't want you to remember. It's March 11th, 2020. The Utah Jazz are warming up to play the Oklahoma City Thunder. Everyone in the arena is ready. Then, out of nowhere, a couple of guys in suits, black suits, walk out onto the floor and start talking to officials. You can see the confusion on the players' faces. The coaches are looking around like, what's going on? Then, the refs huddle up, and they send everyone back to the locker rooms. Minutes later, boom, game postponed. No real explanation, just gone. Now here's where it gets even crazier. The night before that game, Rudy Gobert had done something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. During a press conference, he thought it'd be funny to mock the COVID concerns. So he leaned in and touched every single mic and recorder on the table, smirking while he did it, like he was trying to prove it was no big deal.
You think this is, it's not going to affect us. We're the NBA. One of our players has the coronavirus.
The next day, he tests positive for COVID-19. That moment, that was the tipping point. Because right after Rudy's diagnosis, the NBA shut the entire season down. We're talking about a full league suspension. Just like that, a tweet was fired out from the league's official account, and within minutes, other games were halted mid-broadcast. People didn't realize it at the time, but this wasn't just about basketball. This was the first domino. It was the moment the world saw how real and dangerous this thing was, and it had consequences far beyond that night. The Jazz locker room was immediately put on lockdown. Players couldn't leave. They were being tested, quarantined, isolated. And Rudy? His teammates were furious. Donovan Mitchell ended up testing positive shortly after, and word got out that he wasn't just angry, he felt betrayed. That trust between them, it was broken. And even though they tried to keep it professional, the relationship never fully recovered. Eventually, the Jazz traded both of them. Mitchell went to Cleveland. Gobert ended up in Minnesota. 2 cornerstone players, gone. And those trades reshaped the league in ways we're still feeling now. But that night, that one moment where a guy mocked a virus and the league had to pull the plug, it was more than just the start of the NBA bubble story. It was the start of a whole new reality. A moment when the league and the entire sports world realized nothing was going to be normal again anytime soon, and no one was ready for what came next. So after the league shut down, everything just froze. For weeks, there was silence. No games, no updates, nobody even knew if the season would come back. And honestly, nobody was even thinking about basketball at first. The world was trying to figure out what this virus was and how serious it could get. But behind the scenes, the NBA was in crisis mode. Because it wasn't just about finishing a season, it was about saving the business. What a lot of people don't realize is how much money was on the line. Billions. The league had already taken a financial hit just from suspending the season. If they couldn't finish the playoffs, the losses would be catastrophic. Not just for the owners, but for the players, the TV networks, and every single person tied to the league's ecosystem. Sponsorships, deals, salaries, everything was hanging by a thread. So the NBA had to find a solution, and it couldn't just be creative, it had to be airtight. That's when the idea of the bubble came up. A fully contained, isolated, controlled environment where every game could be played without any external contact. They picked Orlando, specifically the ESPN wide world of sports complex inside Disney World. It wasn't just because of the space, it was because Disney and ESPN had existing deals with the NBA. That made the logistics easier, and with the resort shut down due to the pandemic, they had full control. The league spent over $190 million to build the bubble. That money went into daily testing, private transportation, hotel takeovers, on-site medical teams, tech for contact tracing, food services, and security. The entire thing was operated like a military base, but dressed up like a theme park. 22 teams were invited, not everyone. Just the ones who were either in the playoffs or had a legitimate shot at making it through a few seeding games. Players, coaches, trainers, media, they were all flown in. And once you got in, You couldn't leave. If you did, you had to quarantine. There were no exceptions. Everyone had to wear tracking bracelets. Temperature checks were daily. COVID tests were non-negotiable and frequent. And you had to follow a strict path when walking around. There were red zones, green zones, safe zones. Everything was mapped out. The league even created an anonymous snitch hotline for anyone who broke protocol, and people used it. The thing is, players weren't used to that kind of surveillance or restriction. They were used to freedom. Planes, hotels, cities, fans, routines. But inside the bubble, all of that disappeared. You were in a hotel, locked in a rotation between meals, practice, games, and your room. That was it. But despite the tension, despite how extreme it all was, the bubble worked. There were 0 positive cases during the entire time. The league finished the playoffs. A champion was crowned. And they didn't lose the billions that would have vanished with a canceled season. But this is where it gets real. The league pulled it off, but the cost wasn't just financial. What happened inside that bubble, the isolation, the pressure, the breakdowns, that's the part no one really talks about. Because what looked like a solution on the outside was a mental test on the inside. Once the bubble started, what people saw on TV looked clean and organized. Games were on schedule, players looked locked in, and the broadcasts made it seem like the league had everything under control. But inside, it was something else. The first thing that hit everyone was the isolation. You had some of the world's most famous athletes stuck in hotel rooms. No fans, no normal life, just routine. Wake up, get tested, eat, practice, play, and go back to your room. Same walls, same hallways, same faces, every day, for months. And this wasn't like an off-season. There were no vacations, no downtime, no real privacy. Even your movement was tracked. Everyone wore magic bands that logged where they went, who they interacted with, and how close they were to others. If someone tested positive or even got flagged, they had to trace back every person that had come near them. That meant players were cautious about everything. Conversations, workouts, and even walking in the wrong direction could set off a protocol. It didn't matter if you were a role player or a superstar, everyone followed the same system. Then came the mental toll. Paul George admitted he was struggling with anxiety and depression midway through the playoffs. He said the bubble had him feeling off, and he wasn't the only one. Multiple players talked about the pressure of competing at the highest level while being completely cut off from the world. No crowd noise, no travel, no sense of rhythm. It was just pure basketball inside a vacuum. And that vacuum amplified everything. The emotions, the fatigue, the loneliness. You'd have players trying to stay locked in while also trying to stay sane. Some found routines, others didn't. There were reports of guys sitting in silence for hours after games, not because they lost, but because there was nowhere to go and nothing to do. Fishing became a common outlet. That might sound like a small thing, but when you have professional athletes getting excited over catching a bass in a Disney lake, it tells you how limited their world has become. These were millionaires with no control over their day-to-day life, and that kind of restriction, over time, starts to chip away at you. Then there was the silence during games. No fans meant no momentum swings, no energy, just the sound of
Together
shoes
for the most
squeaking
part.
and players yelling.
Now it goes.
You could
and-
hear everything. Calls, trash talk, frustration, coaches barking instructions, players getting into it. It didn't feel like the NBA. It felt like a scrimmage that just never ended. And as the playoffs went deeper, the environment didn't loosen up. If anything, it got heavier. The stakes were heightened, but there was no release. No travel days, no crowd reaction, no home court advantage, just game after game in the same spot, under the same lights. And it's important to understand this before we move forward, because what happened next in that bubble wasn't just about basketball. It was about something much bigger, something that nearly shut the season down for good. But before we talk about that, please hit the subscribe button, thank you. By the time the playoffs had reached the second round, the bubble wasn't just about basketball anymore. The players were already dealing with isolation, exhaustion, and mental fatigue, but then something happened outside the court that made everything boil over. On August 23rd, 2020, Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man, was shot 7 times in the back by police in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The video of the shooting spread quickly. It wasn't just disturbing, it was familiar, and it pushed a lot of players over the edge. The Milwaukee Bucks were the first to act. They were scheduled to play Game 5 against the Orlando Magic, but they didn't show up. They never even came out of the locker room. At first, people thought there was a delay or a miscommunication, but then it became clear they were boycotting the game. It wasn't coordinated with the league. It wasn't planned with other teams. It was a direct response to the shooting, and it sent shockwaves through the entire sports world. Within hours,
Sports on pause.
If you watch that video, you don't need to be black to be outraged.
every game on the schedule was postponed. That moment changed the tone of the entire bubble. It was no longer just about finishing a season. It became about purpose, about protest, about using that platform to push for something more important than basketball. Inside the bubble, emotions were raw. Players held emergency meetings. Some wanted to walk away from the season completely.
Plea for change, there has been no action. So our focus today cannot be on basketball.
Some wanted to stay and use the spotlight. The conversation wasn't easy. There were disagreements. LeBron reportedly left one of the meetings frustrated. The Lakers and Clippers even voted to shut it all down. For a day or two, the entire playoffs were in limbo. And remember, these weren't normal discussions. These were players stuck in isolation, carrying the weight of social injustice, dealing with the pressure of the postseason, and now being forced to decide whether or not to keep playing while the world outside was burning. Eventually, the players came to an agreement. They would resume the season, but only after securing commitments from the league to support social justice initiatives, voter access programs, and police reform efforts. Games resumed a few days later, but the atmosphere had changed. The bubble wasn't just a sports venue anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance, a place where the athletes took control of the narrative. For the first time in a long time, they weren't just players, they were leaders, and the world was watching. But even with all of that going on, the basketball didn't stop. The playoffs moved forward. The finals were coming, and the Lakers were locked in, focused on winning it all in the middle of the chaos. The pressure was building. The routines were gone. The outside world wasn't quiet. But the Lakers stayed locked in. This team came into the bubble with more than just a title on their minds. They were still carrying the weight of Kobe Bryant's death from earlier that year. That loss shook the entire franchise, and you could feel that emotion throughout the playoffs. Every win had more meaning. Every loss hurt more. They weren't just playing for themselves, they were trying to honor someone who meant everything to the team and the city. LeBron James and Anthony Davis led the charge. Their chemistry had already developed before the pandemic hit, but the bubble forced them to be even more connected. No distractions, no outside noise, just basketball. And that dynamic became a real advantage. The Lakers were one of the few teams that built a rhythm inside the bubble. A lot of teams struggled with the environment, no crowd energy, no travel breaks, no momentum shifts. But the Lakers adapted fast. They created a structure where there was none. Regular team meetings, film sessions, group workouts, even meals became part of the routine. They weren't just showing up, they were building something. And then there was the basketball. From the first round to the finals, the Lakers looked like the most complete team in the bubble. They beat Portland, Houston, and Denver, all in 5 games each. And in the Western Conference Finals, Anthony Davis hit one of the biggest shots of his career.
Trying to disrupt Rondo, he puts it in. Here's Davis, 4-3 in the win. Oh, it's good!
A buzzer-beating 3 over Jokic in Game 2. That moment shifted the energy of the entire series. And without a roaring crowd, you could hear the scream, "Kobe," as the shot went in. That was the type of moment that defined their playoff run. In the finals, they faced the Miami Heat. Jimmy Butler was putting up historic numbers. He pushed them. Game 3 and Game 5 were battles, but LeBron stayed consistent. AD dominated on both ends, and the role players like KCP, Rondo, and Caruso stepped up when it mattered. By Game 6, the Lakers closed it out. They were champions. But the celebration didn't look like a typical title win. No parade, no crowd, just champagne in the locker room. A few family members were allowed in near the end. There were cigars, some smiles, but it was quiet. Almost too quiet for what they had just accomplished. This wasn't just about winning a ring. It was about surviving everything that came with the bubble. The lockdowns, the protests, the silence, the pressure, the emotional weight. The Lakers didn't just win the title, they finished the most difficult, most controlled, and most mentally exhausting season in NBA history. But not everyone sees it that way. Some people still question whether that championship was legitimate. They talk about the environment, the matchups, the conditions. There are conspiracy theories. There are debates still going on till today. And that's exactly where we're going next, into the side of the bubble that still doesn't sit right with a lot of people. The Lakers won the title. It's in the record books. But the debate hasn't stopped. A lot of people still question whether that championship really holds the same weight as a normal one. And it's not about discrediting the Lakers, it's about everything different, and how those differences shape the outcome. Let's start with the obvious. No travel. No hostile road environments, no fans. That changes a lot. Normally, the playoffs are about momentum, home court swings, energy from the crowd, pressure from the noise, but in the bubble, there was none of that. It was the same neutral court every night. No altitude in Denver, no packed arena in Boston, no roaring crowd in Miami, just silence and squeaky shoes. For some players, that silence helped. It took away distractions. It lets them focus. But for others, it completely disrupted their rhythm. Teams that normally fed off energy just couldn't create it from thin air. It wasn't just about skill anymore. It became about who could mentally survive the environment. And not every team was built for that. Now here's where things get uncomfortable. There were teams that came into the bubble with momentum from the regular season, Milwaukee, the Clippers, even the Celtics, but they never looked the same once they got inside. The Bucks had the best record in the league, but they got exposed in the second round. The Clippers, who everyone thought were the biggest threat to the Lakers, collapsed in Game 7 after being up 3-1. Paul George admitted later that he wasn't mentally locked in. He even said the isolation messed with his head. That's not a basketball problem. That's a psychological one. And those collapses left the door wide open for the Lakers. That's where some of the criticism comes in. People say the Lakers didn't face real adversity, that their path was cleared by other teams falling apart, that LeBron benefited from the controlled environment more than other stars. Some even went as far as calling it a Mickey Mouse ring. But here's the thing. That kind of take misses the point. The bubble wasn't easier. It was just different. And the Lakers were the ones who adapted the best. They built structure. They kept their chemistry intact. They treated every game like it mattered, even with no crowd and no energy in the building. That's not luck. That's discipline. That's leadership. That's mental strength. Still, the debate exists for a reason. Because when you change everything, when you remove fans, travel, cities, crowds, it's hard to compare that championship to any other. It's not the same as winning in front of 20,000 people on the road. It's not the same as grinding through travel fatigue and schedule shifts. So is it real? Yeah, it counts. It's in the books. But it's a different kind of title. One that came from surviving isolation instead of overcoming road environments. One that tested mental focus more than physical endurance. And that brings us to the bigger picture. Because beyond the championship, beyond the debates, the bubble revealed something the NBA hadn't fully faced before. The human cost, the personal toll. And that's where we're going next. After the finals, there was barely an offseason. The next season started in just a few weeks. Players were drained, injuries went up, some guys just weren't the same. You look at certain careers post-bubble and it's clear something shifted, and it wasn't just about the games. The bubble tested their mental strength, and not everyone bounced back. The NBA will probably never talk about it in full. Most players won't either, but if you look at what happened beyond the games, beyond the trophy, it becomes clear. The 2020 NBA bubble wasn't just a basketball experiment, it was a psychological one, and it left scars the league still doesn't fully admit. But what do you think? Was it just a normal situation you expect the players to conquer? Well, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.